Okay, like the other modules, this one starts with a quick little exercise. Should be fun, all right? This one, you'll need a partner. You'll need a partner. So I'll give you a minute. Go ahead and find somebody. Find a friend, a roommate, anybody. This isn't going to take long, but I want to just give you some time to do that. All right. Now come back here, pause the video, come back here, and we'll begin. All right. Here's what I'd like you to do. Paper and pencil. I want you to do this. I want you to draw the person sitting next to you, your partner that you recruited, that you coerced to be with you. I want you to draw that person in just 60 seconds. I'm going to give you exactly 1 minute to draw that person sitting next to you, and go. All right, you're drawing that person sitting next to you. Paper, pencil, try to really capture them, really capture their essence. All right, 45 seconds left. As quickly as you can, capture that person. Don't erase. You got about a half a minute left now. 30 seconds. 30 seconds to capture that person sitting next to you. "15 seconds and counting. Down to about 10 now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And pencils down, pencils down. All right. So I want to give you a minute to also share your masterpiece with your friend. Now, I'm going to ask you to sort of take a moment to listen to yourself, listen to your friend, listen to what did you hear? More often than not, when I do this exercise for groups of people, I hear a lot of this, a lot of sort of fear-based, "I'm sorry. This isn't a capture of you at all. This is a terrible portrait of you." And that's all due to this idea of fear, that we fear the judgment of others. We fear criticism. We fear being wrong about things. But if it was two third graders that were drawing these two portraits of each other, you would bet that they would say, "Check this out. Check out this portrait I did of you. It's a masterpiece. It is refrigerator worthy." All right. So as we grow older, we grow more susceptible to this idea of fear, this idea that we fear the judgment of others. And fear actually is a trigger for a lot of different things. For example, we fear the judgment of others. We fear sharing crazy ideas with peers. We don't want to stick our neck out too much because we're afraid people might laugh at us if it's a nutty idea. But let's face it, a lot of nutty ideas end up being pretty revolutionary ideas. We fear being vulnerable. Being vulnerable is a tough thing to do, particularly in today's society. But the only way to get past vulnerability, to sort of feel okay being vulnerable, is standing up to that fear. Brene Brown, one of my favorites, she said fear drives two tapes in your own brain. First of, "I'm not good enough." I'm not good enough to draw this picture of my friend. I'm not good enough to do X, Y, or Z. And if you can get past that, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are that you think you're an expert at X, Y, Z? So fear kind of drives those two tapes really inside our brains. And then fear, I've done this poll for my students. Fear is a big, big one. What keeps us from failing? And I could do a whole nother module on failing. What keeps us from failing more often than not is that idea of judgment and fear. So this is an anonymous poll I did in my own class, and you might see some of your own fears in that particular word cloud. All right. So one thing to cover up fear, though, is being a kid again, being what we have all been, that we were courageous, young, creatively courageous young people. This little girl, I love this picture, this little girl just saying, "Yeah, I can do that pose, no problem," right? Whereas adults are a little more susceptible to the idea of making a fool of themselves in public in an art museum in this case. But being a kid is truly, truly important, and seizing upon our inner child is very, very important. What's one question 3-year-olds always ask? And if you don't know the answer to this one, ask your parents. But I will tell you, it is always why. But if you ever thought, well, why do kids, 3-year-olds in this case, ask why all the time? There's a bunch of great reasons. One is they question assumptions. Think about that, questioning assumption. What is the assumption? Questioning assumptions can lead to so many really unique perspectives on things, right? Questioning what is the assumption and why are we making that assumption? Often kids question the question itself, right? And they take it a step further and question the question. There's this wonderful story Sir Ken Robinson tells about a little girl in the back of a classroom. She never engaged in class ever. And one day, the teacher noticed this little girl was drawing, so she went to investigate. She said, "Well, what are you drawing?" And the little girl said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher said, "Well, no one knows what God looks like." The little girl said, "They will in a minute." And think about that. Think about the fact that kids have this wonderful, because they don't know what they don't know, they have this wonderful creative courage. They're not afraid to be wrong. Kids are rarely ever afraid to be wrong. It's so awesome. And in fact, we prepare students, for the most part, as teachers, we prepare them to be right, but very infrequently do we prepare them to be wrong. Quite honestly, the wrong answer is the right answer to a different question if you really think about it. So, some really interesting things that we can take away from our idea of how playful we were as kids, right? So I want to kind of stress a few of these ideas here. So this wonderful concept of play, there are a few definitions of play I'd like to share with you, but some of them are sort of what you might assume play to be. Aristotle said play is simply rest or downtime for the otherwise industrious soul, right? This Roman poet Juvenal said, "The selfish common people are now happy with diversion and distraction. They care not for the wider Roman destiny because play has distracted them from social consciousness." So here play is a negative. And this guy didn't seem like a fun fella either. All right. And then the Oxford English Dictionary, it brings in these words that play is diversion, it's dalliance, abstention from work, right? It's this idea that play is something separate. It is something that we should essentially grow out of. But quite honestly, what I want to share with you here are some alternative. I completely flipped that slide upside down because these are some alternative definitions of play that I'd like you to consider. One is this: play is not a trivial endeavor. It is necessary for comprehending what we can be and what we can do, from Thomas Hendricks. Another one here, this is a wonderful Dr. Kristen Wong. She says, we have to let go of the idea that we can't both feel playful in the moment and anxious about the state of our world. The idea isn't to ignore your negative feelings, but to give yourself permission to feel joy alongside that negativity. There are a number of benefits to play for adults, including improved stress management and improvement in overall well-being, benefits we could certainly use right now. All right, she wrote this during the pandemic, but it's still true today, to be honest. And then this one from Scott Eberly. Scott Eberly runs a museum of play. Play is an ancient, voluntary, emergent process driven by pleasure that yet strengthens our muscles, instructs our social skills, tempers and deepens our positive emotions, and enables a state of balance that leaves us poised to play some more. So I'd like you to think of play as actually a very necessary part of our lives, much like sleep and dreams are. We often think that play is a rehearsal for later life, that play is something that you and I did when we were kids, and that we should grow out of it. And then we become adults. We don't have time for play anymore. Play is a dalliance, a diversion, and abstention from work, as Oxford English Dictionary likes to say. But actually, this gentleman's, Dr. Stuart Brown, he actually wrote a whole book about play that I absolutely love. And he talks about that a little bit differently. Here's a clip of Dr. Stuart Brown talking about this idea that play is a rehearsal for later life.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is that there may be some temptation on the part of people to look at your work and go, and I think I've heard this in my kind of pop psychological understanding of play, that somehow the way animals and humans deal with play is that it's some sort of rehearsal for adult activity. Your work seems to suggest that that is powerfully wrong.
Yeah, I don't think that's accurate, and I think probably because animals have taught us that. If you stop a cat from playing, which you can do, and we've all seen how cats, bat around stuff, they're just as good predators as they would be if they hadn't played. And if you imagine a kid pretending to be King Kong or a race car driver or a fireman, they don't all become race car drivers or firemen. So there's a disconnect between preparation for the future, which is what most people are comfortable in thinking about play as, and thinking of it as a separate biological entity. And this is where my chasing animals for 4 or 5 years really changed my perspective from a clinician to what I am now, which is that play has a biological place, just like sleep and dreams do. And if you look at sleep and dreams, biologically, animals sleep and dream, and they rehearse and they do some other things that help memory and that are a very, very important part of sleep and dreams. The next step of evolution in mammals and creatures with divinely superfluous neurons will be to play. And the fact that the polar bear and husky, or a magpie and a bear, or you and I and our dogs can cross over and have that experience sets play aside as something separate. And it's hugely important in learning and crafting the brain. So it's not just something you do in your spare time.
All right. So there's this idea of accidental usefulness to play, right? That there's this notion that we play as kids and we make mistakes and we injure ourselves and we learn from that. The accidental usefulness idea of play. Mark Twain famously said, "A man who carries a cat by the tail learns something he can learn in no other way." So there are some lessons that play can teach us. And you heard the doctor talk about you and I and our dogs. This is my beloved dog, Savannah, who I had for 14 years. I loved playing with this dog. I loved everything and all with these dogs. And if you've had dogs before, you know that they play. No matter what age they are, they play. They love to play at age 10 versus age 1. And there is a term for that. It's called neoteny, the retention of immature qualities into adulthood, or actually what my wife accuses me of all the time, right? We are all neotenous creatures. Neoteny is a very important term. Neoteny is basically our biological first name and last name. We are the most youthful, the most flexible, the most plastic of all living creatures. And that gives us a leg up as human beings on adaptability. So I asked you to think about the kind of things that dogs and cats do as playful, and yet we are a species that plays. So tap into your inner child, seize from your inner child some lessons that actually are applicable in our adult life as well. I love this. I'll leave you with this final picture of all of the Toy Story characters sending off this young man to school. But it shouldn't be that we send someone off to school to learn something else. We send them off, we hope that they maintain their creative, childlike, wonderful creative courage as they go off into the world. So I ask you to do the same.